The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Good morning and welcome to our session on the continuity of trading arrangements with Turkey. Firstly, can I ask the panel to introduce themselves on their own terms, name, rank and serial number, starting on my left.
Hello, Richard Warren, Head of Policy for UK Steel, which is the representative body for the UK steel producers.
Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. I'm Dr. Pınar Artıran with Istanbul University Faculty of Law. At the same time, I'm holding one of the WTO shareholder positions attributed by the World Trade Organization.
Thank you very much. And thank you for, I think you've flown in from Turkey to be here this morning,
exactly.
so that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Hasan Turuncu, representative of Turkish Business Association. It is the largest independent group in Turkey, based in London. From Turkey.
From Turkey. And very good to see you again.
Thank you.
We've had you at the committee at least once before, and
yes, thank you so much.
Privately in the past.
Thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you. Dr. Turk, can I ask you firstly, how much trade currently takes place between Turkey and the UK, just to sort of set the scene of what we're talking about here?
The current arrangements between UK and Turkey, I understand the question.
United Kingdom, yeah.
The UK-Turkey relations, as long as UK is in the European Union, governed by the Association Agreement 1963 and the Customs Union.
And how much trade is taking place at the moment?
How much trade?
Yeah.
I got the numbers, just the most latest numbers. The trade volume is around 18.5 billion. Exports from Turkey to UK 11.1. That's 2018. Increase of 15.7%, and imports is 7.4. That's an increase of 13% between UK and Turkey.
Okay. And what are the main type of goods that are traded between Turkey and the UK?
Generally, automotive and automotive products, white goods, consumer goods, textile, and I think more of steel from UK to Turkey. I have some of the list from the Turkish embassy. It shows non-electrical machines, iron and steel and scrap metal from Turkey, automotive and sub-industry products from imports from UK to Turkey. Sorry, from UK to Turkey.
So there's a lot of haulage going between the two,
yes.
then, carrying that. Thank you. And how significant is the level of trade in services between the UK and Turkey?
When you look at the trade volume, it's not as significant as it seems. Most of the products are, look at it, textile, clothes, consumer goods, electrical appliances, cable, wires from Turkey to UK, non-electrical machines, pharmaceutical products, plastic and plastic goods are main trading. But we're working with the City UK. It's another organization from the UK. It's based in London, and they're promoting relations between UK and Turkey in services particularly. I know that they held some events on fintech and how to improve the capital markets in Turkey. Recently, I know that the UK Stock Exchange Group and the Turkish Borsa jointly signed an agreement to sell products together. So it is in the infantry, but I think it's moving in terms of the services.
Thank you very much. Faisal Rashid.
Thank you for coming. You touched based on steel a little bit. I would just like to explore a little bit more how much steel trade happens between UK and Turkey.
I had the numbers very recently. I think if you just bear with a second.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Questions to all of you, really. I mean,
thank you.
Anybody.
It does vary from year to year. Certainly, exports from the UK to Turkey. In 2017, which is the latest year we've got full data for, it was around 300,000 tonnes, which is £130 million worth. Right. To put that into context, that's our third biggest market after the EU, the US. Turkey is our third biggest market. So it's around, in total export terms, it's probably 10% of our exports.
So that's the exports to
Turkey. Right. And Turkey sends about twice as much back, so more like 600,000 tonnes.
And how does it compare with other markets internationally?
In terms of our exports to Turkey, so we send. There is a slight
just
mismatch.
Just on steel.
In terms of the total exports of steel to the EU, so not just stuff we produce here, but all the entire trade, it's about 3.5 million tonnes. 300,000 tonnes to Turkey, about between 300 and 350,000 tonnes to the US. So in the context of, if we think back to this time last year, the amount of difficulties that we were concerned about and facing in terms of trade barriers to the US, trade barriers to Turkey, we're looking at a similar scale of problem. It's a very similar sized market for us.
I'm just trying to understand in terms of steel industry only, how significant Turkey is for UK.
As I said, so it's our third biggest export market. About 10% of our exports are going to Turkey.
To Turkey only,
yeah. It's a similar size market to the US, which is our second biggest market. Okay. In very simple terms, it's an important market for us.
Okay, thank you.
A number from the Turkish embassy saying that in 2018 we have scrap metal exported to Turkey from UK $916 million.
Nearly $1 billion of scrap metal. Yeah, Marcus Fisher.
So can I just ask on the mode of the transport which you use? Is it all hauled over land, or is it mainly or is it shipped?
It's a mixture of ships and going through the European Union. To provide an exact split, I'd have to come back to the committee if that would be useful.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Marcus Fisher. Mark Western.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if you could all summarise how you see the current trading arrangements between the UK and Turkey as provided for by the Customs Union.
Yeah, perhaps I may start. The customs union between Turkey and the European Union, as foreseen in the Ankara Association Agreement, which started as an implementing agreement under Article 24 of the GATT, as we all know, either you have a customs union or free trade agreement, and while you're doing it, you can have implementation period. So we understand that the Turkey-EU Customs Union actually started back in 1963 with the Ankara Association Agreement, but the implementation time actually ended in 1995 when the Customs Union took place between the parties. And this was a decision 1/95 of the Commission and the European Union and Turkey. So the Customs Union actually, as the name literally suggests, provides for the free movement of goods only. It does not cover services. Moreover, the main difficulty which arises out of the customs union is that it's really related to industrial products and processed agricultural products. Therefore, it does not include the primary agricultural products, which actually, if we can manage to modernize the customs union, which is now a talk between the respective governments, that modernization of the customs union will include the raw agricultural products, primary agricultural products, hopefully services. There will be a content for services as well, and all of the remaining matters, including electronic commerce and whatever we could not achieve so far, including public procurement. But so far we don't have it in the current agreements.
Okay. In addition, I can just add, so the customs union determines on industrial goods and the processed agricultural goods, which mean, so the Ankara Association Agreement and the customs union together sets the external tariff for the third countries, but also allows for Turkey and UK to have the preferential rules of origin. So external tariff to non-EU countries and rules of origin between UK and Turkey.
Just to add, finally, on a steel perspective, the customs union does not cover steel products. There was a separate free trade agreement covering European coal and steel community products, which was established a year after the customs union in 1996. So that's a standalone. That was set up separately for historical reasons, largely due to state aid provisions.
Okay. Is there anything else that's not covered? No.
Marcus Fisher at this point, if that's
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, just a technical question on the customs procedures that are required between Turkey and the EU. You spoke about rule of origin. What other customs formalities need to be completed by shippers of goods in either direction? There's an A.TR movement certificate, but what other customs formalities need to be done?
Well, first of all, do you want to say? First of all, there is the ATR document. Obviously, the parties which are exporting, importing are supposed to provide those documents, and also for chemical products, for instance. We have a system in Turkey whereby we're controlling the products at the border, and if it's coming from the European Union countries, then it's already, going through a certain mechanism where the trade will be facilitated. So in case United Kingdom exits the European Union, those products which are coming from the United Kingdom, when they come to the Turkish border, they will have to go through certain checks at the border because they will no longer be available for the systems that we have currently in Turkey, which is called TAREX, which has been put into force in place after our customs union with the European Union. So there will be additional border controls and checks.
I checked.
But in
5
terms
checks
of,
are conducted on the borders.
Yeah, there are those sorts of checks. But in terms of the actual customs procedure, though, there is an export declaration in order to be able to.
There are
for the purpose
9
of
declarations.
VAT, yeah.
Passport, visas, export declaration, carnet from the Turkish custom officers, invoices for the products, insurance certificates, transport permit, original certificates of the cargo from relevant ministry, MNR, as the doctor mentioned, and the transit declaration.
Okay.
Thank you. Back to my question. Marcus Fish, would you like to any follow-up on that?
Well, just to understand, so it is it a frictionless border between the EU and Turkey?
It depends how do you define frictionless. It's very difficult. As you may remember from my previous presentation, sometimes it takes up to 48 hours on the weekends. Yeah. But I think the discussion about the customs union have to be into context in the UK when you talk about Turkish customs union. And this is the biggest missing point. Turkish customs union came to power in 1996. UK was hosting Europe and Alan Shearer was the leading striker. This is how old. By then, we had a military coup in the 1980s, 3 years to come back to democracy, take 10 years to come back from that position. Yeah. There was no internet, there was no services. So the customs union improved Turkish standards, product standards, increased trade between UK and Turkey, it improved employment in Turkey. So if you take it in this context, yes, it is in that. With today's realities and the border checks, and sometimes the Bulgarian officials unnecessary against the customs union practices, which is reported by Katy Perry, by the European Commission, it creates unnecessary delays. Can it be improved? Yes, that's why we're in the customs union modernization talks. Hopefully it will be. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have further question?
Yeah, but it isn't right to characterise a customs union as necessarily frictionless.
If you talk about Turkish customs union, so A is different than the Turkish customs union. Yeah. The Turkish customs union, it was implemented because it was a temporary measure. We were hoping that we were going to be a full member by now, so we agreed on that process. So,
You differentiate that between the Turkish customs union and the European Union customs union. You would say that there was a difference between the two, would you? Yeah.
No, what I meant, like, if you want a final customs union, we don't have a model of a final customs union. We have a Turkish model which was signed implemented in 1996.
Thank you.
So this
can I ask just before I move on, but to Richard Warren, what arrangements currently cover the trade in steel between Turkey and the UK?
So as I touched on a second ago, for historical reasons, which were largely due to state aid provisions, which used to be an awful lot stricter in the EU, specifically in relation to steel, when the customs union discussions were occurring, it was decided that it would be better to have a separate trade agreement just for European coal and steel community products, which would include stricter provisions on state aid. Those provisions have they've been on state aid have been reduced somewhat post the European Community on Steel and Coal, but the FTA continues to exist. So we're not part of the customs union, but we do have tariff-free access to the Turkish market for steel. Because of a WTO agreement which predates all of that, the Turkish steel industry will continue to have access tariff-free to the UK market regardless of what happens with Brexit. We have 0 tariffs on steel for everyone in the world.
So, okay, that's at least some good news there.
Certainly for the Turkish steel industry, yes.
Okay, can I ask to all, the government and the UK government has confirmed it not be able to replicate the current trading arrangements that we have with Turkey in time for a possible no-deal Brexit. And that would be a week Friday, about 9 days' time. In your own opinions, what would that mean for trade between Turkey and the United Kingdom, both in terms of tariff and non-tariff barriers? And whichever one of you wants to go with that one first, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, perhaps I may start. We've been conducting actually some studies by the industry groups in Turkey, and actually this was all over in the media as well. One of the main complaints that the business people are talking about are technical barriers to trade, because most of the tariffs have been, lowered thanks to the customs union. But we all know that in current international trade relations, non-tariff barriers often play an important role. And when I was mentioning this tariff system that we have in Turkey for goods which are coming from the European Union, this specified and facilitated customs control system. If there is no deal between United Kingdom and European Union and Turkey, now the customs checks will be much more difficult. So those customs operators in Turkey who normally when they receive products from the EU countries, they clear immediately by checking certain boxes on the computers, won't be able to do that for the UK products. And especially for the majority of the technical regulations that we have, and we all know that actually most of the Turkish production regulations are based on the alignment with the European Union. Therefore, if the UK product is no longer qualified as a EU customs union product, you'll have to wait longer to go through the technical regulation barriers.
Thank you.
TCI identified several problems with this not rolling over or a no-deal scenario. Turkey, we worked with our members, which is around 800, but in reality more than 4,000 companies. The Turkey Automotive Industry Association did a report, which I can share with the committee. In a no-deal scenario, or if you don't roll over the agreements between UK and Turkey, it says that in a no-deal scenario, it could wipe 3.8 billion a year, 0.45% of Turkish GDP, and it will wipe out 3.8 billion a year, which is 0.45 GDP of Turkey, and threaten 5,900 jobs. So it's done by PwC, it's a credible company, I guess, and I'm more than happy to share with you. And
so that would be the end of the UK's UK's participation in the customs union with Turkey would cost that.
No, if there is no deal or if Turkey does not involve, that's not rolling over.
Exactly. That's removing the UK from that current customs union.
If we don't roll over between UK and Turkey, we lose 3.8 billion a year. Also, we will be trading on WTO terms, as the doctor was mentioning. So EU tariff will apply to UK goods coming to Turkey, vice versa. And then we'll have EU non-preferential rules of origin will be on UK. Then the customs duty, we're trying to understand because it was just published last week. My colleagues here in the embassy and TUSI trying to study them, but mainly I think it will impact on automotive and garment and textile. Even if the champion was mentioned about zero tariff on steel, it is still not an advantage for Turkey because then everybody else will have similar. So the Chinese steel will have zero tariffs. Turkey will lose this competitive advantage. The Turkish automotive industry, we spoke to Ford, Koç, Holding, etc. They are the major exporter to UK, to SIAD members. And they work with this report. They're saying that the Turkish export to UK will decrease 30%, and which is equal to 50,000 vehicles and 700 million loss. And cars will be 10% more expensive. And then due to unpredictability between UK and Turkey relations, there will be slowdown. And also car manufacturer will lose their competitive advantage, similar to the steel industry. The most interesting part we found out about no rolling over scenario or no deal scenario is the electronic industry, which is 1.4 billion UK market leader. So the top destination for electric and electrical products is UK for Turkey. And Turkey exported 980 million electronic products to UK last year.
And 980 million?
918. 918,
okay.
Of which 408 million was LCD TVs. LCD TVs.
LCD televisions.
Yes, televisions. Yeah. We're good, so we produce LCD.
So televisions might get more expensive. Is this what you're about to tell me?
So, so in case of no deal or no rolling over.
Beko, Vestel.
Vestel, major TV producer.
Okay.
White goods, Beko and TV are Vestel. The problem here, if there's no roller, it will be rules of origin applied here between UK and Turkey. And as you know, most of the products are now produced, sub-products coming from Far East for better competitive price and no longer produced in Europe. So if rules of origin applies, they think that they will not be able to match this criteria and we will lose 1.4 billion because they will not be, cumulatively, there will be not enough rules of origin to sell it to European or UK markets.
Thank you. Matt Western, do you want to come in at this point?
Just actually on the automotive side, the figures you were describing are pretty staggering.
Yes.
What you were saying about, I think Ford, you said?
30%.
30%, they would lose 30% of their volume. And could you just illustrate that better for us as a committee to understand? Because there's a movement is that am I right in thinking there are engines that are exported from the UK to Turkey?
Yeah.
How does that all work? And what are the implications?
As you know, modern technology and industry is different than traditional. Nowadays, the on-time production lines are in place. And I think this is when visited Ford here and Ford in Turkey. And I hope that you can visit Turkey and we can show you the borders as well as soon as possible.
I'd like to. We've been very keen for a long time.
We'll be delighted to have you. The logistical supply chain is very complex. The engines from here to Germany, Italy, and from Germany to Turkey, assemble in Turkey, come back to here. So this is how complex it is actually.
In commercial vehicles?
Yes. And that's why it is really, it will impact them more than anything, more than all other industries. It seems, at least the report it shows.
So you're saying there'd be a tariff on the engines coming into Turkey on a no-deal scenario?
Yeah.
And then there would be a tariff coming out of Turkey?
Yeah. And then
so the tariff would be how much going into Turkey on an engine?
I think they think it's 10%. But
on an engine?
Yes, but this new announcement by the UK government, we've been studying. It will be a bit more detailed. I think it varies. Some of them can go up to 30%, but the report assumes 10%.
But at the same time, we're not sure whether the new plan proposed by the government is in compliance with the WTO rules, because there are some, suggestion that it might violate the MFN principle, Article 1 of the GATT. So it needs to be studied, and I think the European Commission also declared that they are studying, carefully whether this new arrangement would be in compliance with the WTO norms. We're also studying in Turkey as academics and others.
The last one was the clothing also industry will be, and textile will be in the trouble. Turkey export $1,920,000,000 clothing products, which constitute Turkish 70% of all total exports. It is projected to be 12% tax on that.
Just there's a question that's been hanging in my mind. Dr. Artıran, thank you. You talked earlier about the customs union and modernising the customs union, I think. Is there any numbers put on the value to the Turkish economy of being part of this particular customs union you're in? And what would the GDP gains, are they known or are they projected to be if you're in a modernised customs union? Do we have any numbers on that?
Well, I'll try to rely on my colleague, Dr. Hasan Tunç, because he comes from the sector. But, we have conducted, 3 years ago, I acted as a consultant for the European Commission for the impact assessment report that the European Commission prepared for the EU-Turkey Customs Union modernization. And that report actually revealed, and that report was actually driving on the World Bank's 2014 report, is showing that for both parties, for Turkey and the European Union, it's going to be a major boost for both of the parties' economy. I don't have the right figure, but I'm sure my colleague will be able to say. Therefore, both.
I think your answer is helping him find the right page. So we're just
Thank you. So the impact assessment report prepared both by the European Commission as well as the Turkish government, they all reveal that the modernization will be helpful. So it's a win-win scenario if actually there's a political will on the table.
Modernization, in addition, it helps Turkey in a sense. It solves all our discussion between UK and Turkey. The moment we modernize our customs union, it solves our issue to having to have a parallel discussion with UK. Once we have modernized our customs unit EU, it will automatically put us in the discussion with UK. So all our discussion.
And have we any numbers on the value?
In terms of numbers, I have two reports commissioned by the European Commission. One was conducted by BKP Development Research and Consulting, October 2016, in coordination with European Commission, under the scenario of custom union modernization and FTA in additional areas. Scenario generates a strong bilateral export gain for the EU of 27.1 billion euro for EU. The bilateral export gain of 5.0 billion projected for Turkey. For the EU, this scenario is estimated to generate a change in real GDP about 0.1%. The EU's economic welfare increases by 5.4 billion euro. For Turkey, real GDP rises by 1.44%, and economic welfare increases by 12.5 billion.
But if I may just add there, I think the important point, because I was part of that, impact assessment report that the Commission prepared 3 years ago. So when I look at the numbers now, the European Commission at the time had studied two scenarios. One would be an enhanced customs union, and the other one would be deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. So the customs union is 27% more helpful for the parties compared to the DCFTA, deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, which would be helpful only 7%.
So the numbers on GDP would be?
The GDP, so it would be for the customs union 0.007 and the DCFTA minus
for
0.
Turkey.
Come again?
For Turkey?
Yes. No, for the EU.
For the EU.
That's for the EU.
And what's the benefit for Turkey of being in the current customs union and an enhanced customs union?
Right. So for Turkey, it would be if the customs union 1.44. For the FTA is 0.26.
Additional.
Just the GDP if we enhance by making a customs union versus the free trade agreement.
So you've made the big gains now already.
Yes.
You still make a smaller incremental gain.
Exactly. So if we remain in the customs union.
Marcus Fisher, I think you wanted to come into the question.
There are a couple of questions that I had just to clarify. Just on that last point, how much of those differences are due to the extra product lines that would come into the modernisation rather than the modernisation of the processes involved itself? Do you have any feel for that?
Because expand the scope of the trade. So it will include services, public procurement, agriculture. So that's also itself.
So that's included in that modernisation accounting. Exactly. So it's not apples with apples. You're not talking about the gains just to come from the procedures.
Both, and it will be simplified procedures under the border, so it also will facilitate further trade. So it's two.
I mean the scope of the enhanced customs union, of course.
So it will expand the scope, but also it will further facilitate and quicker trade.
So just coming back to the to the automotive supply chain that you were talking about, I just wanted to understand. Firstly, is there an inward processing system available for customs or a duty suspension regime of some kind that operates within Turkey for the automotive sector there to be able to offset import duties against the export tariffs that would then be payable?
I didn't check this, but I'm more than happy to put
that would be
back in
useful to know,
writing if the clerks can send me this. More than happy to answer it.
And just coming back to the idea of you mentioned, I think, Dr. Artıran, the alignment of the regulations and the potential for regulatory checks to potentially delay things. Are you aware of the decision by the European Union to allow UK certifications of whole vehicles to be registered within the EU, and will a similar technical measure be available for Turkish authorities and vehicle authorities to register the UK certifications?
So if I understand you correctly, the new facilitation that the European Union is providing for the UK goods, will it have a meaning for the Turkish, customs officers?
Yeah.
I think they would, but at the same time, I think we need to, face the reality, and this actually will probably bring me to the idea of the asymmetrical relationship within the customs union of Turkey and the European Union, whereby the EU would have a certain facilitated agreement with a third country. If UK becomes a third country, those countries' products would have, easy access to the Turkish market. But if my product do not have easy access, facilitated access to the UK market, I think it will be very hard for Turkey to accept this. This was already a scenario when TTIP was being, negotiated between United States and the European Union, and that's where exactly actually the Turkish government had really, expressed its negative approach about the European Union and the asymmetrical relationship, and that's how actually the modernization of the Turkey-EU customs union happened. Therefore, my short answer to your question would be, yes, that can be done, but I think the same facility to Turkish products should be available for when they have access to the UK market.
Thank you. Dr. Artıran, could I ask you, could preferential arrangements covering trade and agricultural products be agreed independently between the UK and Turkey, as this is not covered in by the customs union at the moment?
Yeah, there are. As we said, the primary agricultural products are not covered by the customs union, and I think this could be a subject for negotiations between the United Kingdom and Turkey for a potential trade agreement. But I think, if I'm not wrong, it's only 5% of the trade between Turkey and United Kingdom. Therefore, if the United Kingdom does not see this as a priority because it only covers 5% of the trade, volume between the countries, that would be a problem. But currently, there is a possibility of, making a deal between United Kingdom and Turkey because it's not covered by the customs union. Therefore, you have no obligation, or Turkey does not have any obligation towards the European Union to wait for the European Union to sign a deal with the United Kingdom.
And just briefly, what sort of agricultural products would you want to buy and what would you want to sell? If you have a Turkish view on that, is it possible to give that answer?
Well, Turkey is a Mediterranean country, so we have plenty of, primary agricultural products to sell, and that's, currently the main, bleeding problem of the customs union, because I can only sell, processed agricultural products to the European Union. Therefore, you name it, the wide variety of agricultural products, primary agricultural products that you would see in Turkey, and you have to also keep in mind that those products are being produced in compliance with the EU regulations, the sanitary and phytosanitary standards regulations, so they are good products. Therefore, anything actually could be exported to the United Kingdom if there would be a deal.
And I can always recommend Scotch lamb and beef, but that's another story for another day. Richard Warren, can I ask you, would it be possible for the UK and Turkey to roll over specific arrangements for steel without customs union agreement, the customs union agreement being replicated?
So I just very quickly want to touch on the impact of the non-rollover for steel.
Yeah, okay.
Essentially, Turkey is a highly competitive market for steel. There's a lot of imports coming in from Russia and the Ukraine, so to a certain extent it's used as a flex market. It's only able for us to export when there are prices at a certain level. The analysis we've done says the lack of a rollover would mean an average of 16% tariffs on steel products, so it's ranging between 0 and 40%. And the discussions we've had with our members effectively mean we just won't export there anymore. There is no way we'll be able to be competitive in that market with a tariff of 16%. Is it possible to roll over just that free trade agreement on the coal and steel products? Our understanding of WTO rules would say it's not. You can only have a free trade agreement under WTO rules if it covers substantially all trade. So our view is even if you had primary agricultural products and steel and anything that wasn't included under the customs union, you would be on fairly dodgy ground under WTO rules for whether it counted as substantially all trade under the rules. So our view, and certainly the direction we've been given by the UK government, is on the coal and steel element, it is not possible outside discussions on a customs union.
We might check that point with some experts from the WTO, or an expert from the WTO later this morning, but that's an interesting point. Faisal Rashid, my question.
Could you just remind us what percentage of UK steel output goes to Turkey?
So it's 300,000 tonnes, so it's about 10% of exports, 5% of total production.
5% of total production, thank you.
Faisal Rashid,
You mentioned about, obviously, in no deal scenario, there are lots of implications. So are your members preparing for that? Are they doing anything in the changing environment?
They're waiting.
They've only 9 more days to wait.
No, but everybody's following the negotiations, and they're trying to understand the implications. But there are 2 things we've noticed, 2 trends. One was they're doing stockpiling, both in the UK and Turkey, just in case. That's what we get from everybody. That both in the UK and in Turkey, we do stockpiling buffer in case. The second thing, they're working with their UK partners and European partners to lobby in Brussels and in London to be able to have as frictionless as possible a trade deal between EU and Turkey. Between UK and Turkey. That's the 2 things at that moment. These are the contingency. I know that some, but it's off record maybe. Some planning to move to have some European depots, etc. But at that stage, what they're doing is just to do stockpile here in the UK and in Turkey, and also trying to make sure to talk to people who are in the decision-making process, that to have a frictionless trade between UK.
So they are preparing for that.
Yes.
Dr. Warren?
So there's a range of preparation. Largely speaking, our members have effectively said don't ship steel to Turkey after March. There's too much of a risk that the tariff on top of that would mean that they would be landed with it. Where they have had direct discussions, obviously, with their customers, they've said, if you do take delivery after March, you will be liable for the tariff. But largely speaking, at the minute, with the uncertainty, UK producers are drawing back from the Turkish market. One area where they can mitigate slightly is for companies that produce the same or similar products in Europe. They will shift production to Europe so that they can export to Turkey tariff-free.
So how that's impacting to their business? You know, I mean, they're not exporting; they're holding back. So, are their orders being delayed, or they will be, shipping afterwards, or what's happening in their manufacturing side of the production side of it?
As I said, Turkey is a flex market, so it will vary quite a lot from year to year how much we do export there. So at the minute, some production has already gone there, obviously in the first 3 months of the year. But as I said, essentially, the assumption is we will not be exporting to Turkey for the remainder of the year, or if we do, in very small amounts, which it will feed through into production levels, but because it's a relatively small percentage of overall production, and obviously there were fluctuations happening in what we're exporting to the US, what we're exporting to the EU, a lot of it related to Brexit. It's difficult to pinpoint specifically how that is impacting on production levels.
Just additional cost, Mr. Rashid. You have to rent bigger places and export more. So at that stage, the most important part has been the additional cost on the exporters. So far.
And how the Department for International Trade is engaging with you? I mean, is there any engagement or any help from DIT?
We've been working with DIT, DEXU, BASE, and even Foreign Office very closely. DIT has been fantastic. We've been working very close here. DIT team from top down, and in Turkey, from the Consul General to whole DIT team. We have organized reciprocal visits, ministerial level visits, delegations went to Turkey and back to Turkey. In fact, BASE committee came to Turkey, studied the rules of origin with our experience. But 2 points we would like to make here, if possible. DIT set up 2 mechanisms which we've been excluded so far. We've been getting information all the time, but it's always on ad hoc basis or when we ask. What we would be perfect, because Brexit is actually beyond the UK. There are so many actors involved and needs to be informed about the process. And they set up the business stakeholder advisor group and continuity group. And it would be ideal for us, at least we are involved in the trade continuity group because of the trade level between UK and Turkey. And the second, there is a study group, a trade study group taking place between UK and Turkey on the government level. And the private sector, it would be great if we can have an input into these discussions. So these 2 major points we would like to make. One is to be able to join the trade continuity group at DIT. That allows us to have information and have some input. Also, the trade study group between UK and Turkey would be ideal if they have an input from the private sector, because this agreement will impact all our business.
And also,
so far
and also proactively, DIT to provide you information rather than you are actually asking for the information.
Yeah.
So
my colleagues in Istanbul consulate has visited TÜSİAD, and they said that they set up a Brexit team.
Dr. Warren, I understand there was a cancellation of discussions with the businesses on rollover last month.
Indeed.
So
you mentioned the trade continuity group. Yeah, it doesn't. As far as we're concerned, it doesn't exist anymore. So it was a group that ran for a number of months that updated business organisations on the progress with the free trade agreements or the continuity of them. We were only actually invited in the last month that they were happening. So I haven't a vast amount of experience of them, apart from there was an element that they said, whatever we tell you, you can't pass on to anyone. And as a trade association, if we can't pass that information on to our members, it's a slightly redundant exercise. Certainly after a month of going, the group was cancelled. It's for reasons of there were too many leaks from the group.
Right.
I'm not sure there was a vast amount of information that we were told in the group that wasn't essentially public information anyway. But that element of it has been frustrating. Certainly from a slightly parochial point of view on the steel FTA between Turkey and the EU. When we did raise it in meetings, certainly from a DIT point of view, there was a rather blank response. I'm not sure they were particularly aware of it. It was a better response certainly from BEIS, but DITs, it didn't seem to be particularly on their radar.
But are you happy with the engagement from DIT with the businesses and on rollover?
On the free trade agreement continuity, I would say the engagement has been lacking, and certainly this element of we can tell you but you can't tell anyone else was very frustrating. Other elements of DIT have been fantastic. Certainly our engagement on trade remedies over the last 18 months. We might not have got everything we wanted, but certainly the engagement has been very good.
And what about the rollovers, preparation of rollovers?
As I said, the preparation of rollovers, we've got. We were only invited in the last month of engagement, and now that group has been cancelled. So I can't be particularly positive about the engagement now.
Okay.
Thank you. Just want to move to Catherine West. Well, you've just said that about tariffs and steel and trading at WTO. It's not that ringing endorsement that I think I heard one MP start Prime Minister's questions with last week. Just forget it, leave with no deal, trade it with the World Trade Organization. If you were speaking to that MP, what would you say to him?
Steel is in a slightly different situation in terms of tariffs, in that we've been trading tariff-free, or certainly there have been no tariffs on imports of steel from anywhere in the world, including Turkey and China and India. There's no tariffs on steel into the UK since 1994. So we're in a slightly different situation to most other manufacturing sectors. But that does highlight the importance of things like trade remedies for us, because we're dealing with no tariffs, but many of our markets still do have tariffs. For example, Turkey, China, India. We do need those trade remedies. So they're very important.
Just to clarify, at the moment you're selling tariff-free into Turkey?
At the moment, we export tariff-free into Turkey.
And if there's no deal...
an average of 16% tariffs, but up to 40% on certain steel products. However, Turkey will continue as it does.
So if you end up trading at World Trade Organization terms, you'd face an increase of cost of 16% of your product going in the Turkish market?
16%, exactly. Which the impact of... speaking to our members have said essentially they will not be able to compete in that market.
So if the UK is exporting on with no agreements but on WTO terms, what effect would that have in your industry?
So to Turkey, 16% tariff, we just won't export there anymore.
So it's not something you particularly welcome then?
It's certainly not something we would welcome.
I would imagine that it wouldn't be, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
The difficulties of finding a solution to it are for someone far cleverer than I. Essentially, the discussions we've had with DIT and BEIS is you cannot replicate that free trade agreement on steel. It has to be part of discussions over a wider customs union or free trade agreement with Turkey, and they can't really happen because of the customs union between Turkey and the EU. Cannot really happen until the EU and the UK has sorted out its trading relationships. So it's a very frustrating position to be in, but it is one of the inevitable consequences of Brexit as we see it at this point.
Thank you. I'd love to probe further, but time as such. Catherine West.
Has your organisation done any analysis as to the loss of profit for companies in terms of, you said some were pulling back?
Indeed. So as I highlighted previously, we send about 300,000 tonnes of steel. That's £130 million worth of steel. to Turkey in 2017. It does vary from year to year, but overall, on average, it's our third biggest market after the EU and the US. Still, companies have essentially said, because it's such a competitive market, it's not quite the same in the US, which has much higher prices, because it is such a competitive market, even that 16% tariff would essentially prevent us from exporting there.
And what about projected job losses?
I wouldn't want to touch specifically on job losses. As I said, it's very difficult to pinpoint how that would impact on it. For certain, you can look at certain products that we produce that we send an awful lot there. So certain construction products which would take a hit. That's where a lot of the steel exports from the UK would be concentrated on. We certainly couldn't pinpoint a job loss. What we can say is the £130 million worth of steel that we send there each year, that essentially would reduce significantly, or perhaps even be wiped out completely.
And you mentioned in an earlier answer about the Trade Remedies Authority. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how you found them to date.
So legally they don't exist yet. There is the secondary legislation has been laid to create a directorate within DIT. We are hoping to have our first meeting with them within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So they've been present in meetings but unable to comment. But we are hoping very much in the next 2 weeks, particularly if there is a no-deal Brexit. The volume of work on their plates is significant, and we need to have those discussions as early as possible.
The committee was a bit surprised that they weren't able to name some of the key trade unions who represent workers in the steel industry, which gave an indication of some of the work that there is needed to do to catch up. You don't need to comment on that.
I can't comment on that, but there is a significant amount of work that they will need to undertake. I can only hope they do not need to be undertaking it all from the 30th of March.
And this is a question for the panel. Leaving aside formal trade agreements, what steps could Turkey and the UK take to facilitate trade in the short term after Brexit?
Well, I think, thank you very much for the question. What I was trying to say all over from the very beginning, the technical regulations are very important. So what we could do is the WTO agreements also allow the signature of mutual recognition agreements. So in order to facilitate trade happening smoothly between United Kingdom and Turkey, actually the parties could sign for many products for some technical regulations and the mutual recognition agreements. So without, going through some checks, because we know that for many years under the EU, you are applying the same regulations, and we're applying the same regulations. Even if there is no agreement by the 29th of March, we could at least, sign mutual recognition agreements. That would be my humble suggestion. The other thing which could be done, as the chairman at the beginning suggested, if the EU provides some facilitated trade arrangements for the United Kingdom, Turkey through the customs union could be doing the same thing, but Turkey would need to give be having reassurances from the EU side that the United Kingdom would be delivering the same amount of flexibility.
Thank you very much. Mark Western. Just conscious of time.
Yeah, just picking up on that. Can I ask Dr. Torrent and Mr. Warren, what would the ideal future trading relationship be between the UK and Turkey? How would it look like really in the longer term?
My answer would be fairly simple. It is as it is now. We have tariff-free access to the Turkish market for all steel products, and the sooner we can get back to that after Brexit, the better.
It's for us always improved as is, and improved, of course, to include even services, agriculture, and other. So there is a will between UK and Turkey, and in the UK government, definitely there is a will to make a deal with Turkey and Turkish government. So I think the frictionless trade that has been set from the beginning would be ideal for us. No tariff, etc. As you know, an enhanced free trade agreement would be ideal for the business.
Okay.
Current settings and improved.
And how dependent is our UK relationship with Turkey dependent on our relationship with the EU?
It's very dependent.
Critical.
Yes, it is critical for several reasons. As you have noticed, even from UK perspective, EU, it's paramount for a trade deal. Any trade deal between UK and Turkey will have to take into account EU. That's for sure, for various reasons. But for one reason, if Turkey wants to to modernize the customs union with EU, then we will probably, EU will have a condition to have on their own standards, even if we have today UK-Turkey services agreement, we will have to take into account in the future, if Turkey modernize the customs union, we will have to modernize with EU standards for goods and the services. So that may limit our services agreement between UK, or may even define.
And Dr. Artıran, so essentially we will, any arrangement between the UK and Turkey will have to wait until we have some agreement in place with the EU.
Thank you very much for the question. Normally, it does have to, because when you look at the Article 24 of the GATT, which requires common commercial policy to be applied between the customs union partners, which Turkey and the European Union have, but at the same time, Decision 1/95, the customs union decision between Turkey and the European Union, brings some obligations among the parties. So Turkey so far already signed 2 free trade agreements without the EU signing trade agreements. So we've done twice. I'm not trying to say that just because we did earlier on we're going to do the same, but at the same time we have to say that there are some institutional framework problems emanating from the Turkey-EU customs union, like notification or not being notified all the time by the European Union. Therefore, if the obligation weighs on both parties for Turkey and European Union to be in compliance with the customs union, so I believe that if the EU somehow does not honor the terms of the agreement, then Turkey would have to sign again yet another time a third agreement with a third country if the UK becomes a third country, like we did with the previous 2 countries where the EU did not have a trade agreement but Turkey signed the trade agreement with.
Yeah. We can have kind of agreement or understanding to reach between UK and Turkey to cooperate on customs and regulatory inspection of each other's imports, even at that level. So that will prepare the ground for the future. It doesn't mean we should sit and wait for UK and EU to conclude, but we can have understandings, at least on the inspections and customs and regulatory arrangements already now in the future deal.
Thanks, Chair.
Marcus Fish.
Yeah.
Time.
Sure. I just wanted to ask about the modernisation of the customs union. Are there any other ways that you think that it will impact on what we can do between the UK and Turkey? And in particular, I'm interested in the within your customs union with the EU, to what extent there is tariff leakage in terms of tariff revenue to the Turkish government from goods being shipped into the EU first and then coming into Turkey. Is that an effect that you find? And because when we are looking at potential for a customs union with the EU, for example, we would have a Rotterdam effect, where if goods came through Rotterdam first before moving into the UK, then the EU would collect all of those tariffs.
Well, that actually
on
happened.
UK goods.
Yeah, that actually happened with the Mexico case.
Right.
It was a bleeding problem for Turkey because those cars which were being imported from Mexico would, enter from the European Union custom borders, then it would come to Turkey. Yeah. So without us collecting any, customs duties, so it would have free, entrance. That's why actually Turkey started applying some trade defense instruments to protect itself, and that's precisely why you have trade remedies in international trade agreements. This is not a desired outcome. But all it's being said is that if a country signs a trade agreement with the European Union but does not replicate the same trade agreement with Turkey, which is a customs union with the European Union, obviously a country like Turkey has to protect itself. And the only way to do it is either you're going to apply trade defense instruments or you'll try to, sign a parallel trade agreement even if the EU did not have it earlier on, or you'll try to, invite kindly European Union to do something about it.
Yeah. Because they face no consequences for not signing any deal with Turkey.
Yeah.
Like
that's
Algeria.
the asymmetry now.
Yeah.
So it's a trade defense.
Yeah.
You
have to
remedy that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just briefly, in what ways is the existence of trade defence measures between EU and Turkey affected in trade in steel products?
We didn't. I checked. Sure, please. While I'm checking my
very
paper.
few. There is, I believe, one on steel products between Turkey and the EU, but it's not a product we produce in the UK. There is currently a case against hollow sections imported into the EU from Turkey that is very close to being concluded. We expect definitive measures to be introduced in October. However, this does create a slight difficult situation. If we've left the EU with no deal by that point, the EU will have a measure in place, but the UK will not, and we will need to launch essentially a fresh investigation, which means we would be 12 to 18 months at least behind the EU. So we would have an open market for those products, whilst effectively the EU had closed its market, which we can only estimate would result in increased dumping into the UK. So that is a major concern from us. We are obviously hoping a transition period will prevent that happening.
Thank you.
I spoke to, because Turkey is not in the single market, that's why it's subject to defense measures by the EU. If we were in, it would have been different. But what I did, whether to see there have been any impact or not, I spoke to Turkish Steel Exporters Association. In 2008, actually, the steel export in Turkey increased 36.1 year on year. They reached 15 billion. They rose to 20.8% in terms of quantity and reached 21.4 million tons. So it's actually increasing. What happened was European Union, Middle East, and North American countries have been the main market. But now Turkey these are the main markets, but significantly decreased from US and to US, Iraq, and Algeria. So Turkey will now move into Southeast Asia, West Africa, and Latin America. So this is how it happened. In terms of export to EU, it hasn't been huge, significantly impacting because it still continues. In fact, it improved. Turkey is looking now, instead of America now, to Southeast Asia, West Africa, and Latin America as an alternative.
Thank you. Just a final question before I wrap up the session. The UK could exit the European Union in 9 days' time, possibly with no deal. What's your view on that scenario occurring? Blank canvas, what are your thoughts?
Ladies
first. Good, bad, or indifferent. Ladies first.
First of all, I think I do not believe in the possibility of that. I think even if a small extension would be arriving, if it happens...
You've got to believe for the moment. I'm sorry. Only politicians dodge hypothetical questions, not academics.
I think life will be difficult for all of us, especially as a trade lawyer who started first as a WTO lawyer. I would feel really sorry because WTO is not the best answer. It's a great organization. It lays down wonderful tools. But if it would be the best scenario, no countries would sign free trade agreements or customs unions. Therefore, I would fervently hope, if there is no deal by the 29th of March, that we need to, bring our act together and try to sign a deal. WTO would not be enough for anybody. That's my answer.
Thank you.
The same. I mean, it's not a catastrophe, but it is really bad for the trade relations. So we would prefer a deal as soon as possible for the certainty, even any deal.
Any deal. Yeah. Thank you. Steel.
It would be fairly disastrous for the steel sector. I'll just leave you with a stat. The timing couldn't be worse for a no deal, with trade restrictions into our second biggest market in the US, safeguards at an EU level which would count against us, and a loss of access to free trade agreements. We'd go from a position last year, maybe 5 or 6% of our steel exports had trade barriers in the form of tariffs. In a no-deal situation, 97% of our exports would face tariffs or some form of trade restriction. So a no-deal scenario is bad.